Hello, everybody. I'm Johnny Roberts. We're glad you're with us for another edition of Lights Out. Coming up a little bit later in the program, we're going to talk to one of Virginia's finest, Hermie Sadler, because we figure as if we're going racing in Richmond, Virginia, we better have one of the Sadler brothers on with us tonight. So we're looking forward to that. Now, if you want to go back to the last time NASCAR's Cup Series was on track at Indy, a lot of people afterwards were saying that Kyle Larson got special treatment from NASCAR as he has become the sports golden boy. Now, first of all, look at the scenario in and of itself. The wreck on the backstretch, it appeared to me as if Ryan Preece was out of the racing surface. Therefore, NASCAR made the proper call to, at that point, not throw the yellow immediately and allow Kyle Larson to get to the point of winning the race. Now, I don't think the decision would have been any different if Tyler Reddick was in the lead. But take all that aside and look at the history of sports over the last few decades. Sports have always had this so-called golden boy. Remember Michael Jordan in one of his final games, and certainly his last game in the NBA Finals, Michael Jordan clearly pushed off on Brian Russell. One of the most blatant offensive fouls in the history of the league, but yeah, it was Michael Jordan. Do you want to be the referee that makes an offensive foul call on Michael Jordan that changes the outcome of that game? And did it really change the outcome of that game? Fact of the matter is that sometimes when the rules present themselves, you have somebody that's in the lead, and I really doubt as if NASCAR is sitting there saying, let's throw this yellow now, or let's not throw the yellow now because of who is in the lead. I remember a few years ago when Jeff Gordon was leading the Coke 600 and rain was imminent, NASCAR came out and said, look, we are going to race 50 more laps. And the phones lit up, right? The social media lit up. Everybody was saying, look, NASCAR made that decision because Jeff Gordon was in the lead. Again, I do not think it mattered who was in the lead at that point. That's what the rules said. But also, there are always going to be golden boys in sports, and therefore you may get a little skew of the rules in order to have something go a little bit smoother and not have a referee's call or an official's call in racing make the outcome determined by them. All right, folks, we promised you, since we are racing in Virginia, we want to talk to one of Virginia's finest, that, of course, being Hermie Sadler. Hermie, it is so great to see you, my brother, and talk about some of the old times. But we all used to spend a lot of time at the racetrack together. What does a day consist of right now for Hermie Sadler?
Well, Johnny, it's good to see you, and certainly glad to be on with you. I miss seeing you. Spent about 15 years or so on the road with you, and
Yeah.
a lot has changed. You know, Elliot and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and it's almost like we've both lived two completely separate lives in some ways. There was a time from around 1988, when I got real serious about go-kart racing and through late model stock car racing, and then the Busch Grand National Series, and then the Cup Series and Xfinity Series and all these other things, and then TV. My first priority, I would say, along with family, was my career. And my career at that time required me to do a lot of traveling, as you well know, every weekend. And so now, fast forward to 2024, I'm still just as busy, but my number one priority is family, and with that, my family business, which is our convenience stores and truck stops and restaurants, and looking after my kids, spending more time with family. I got a granddaughter now. A lot of things are different, but now I travel when I want to, in some respects, John, and not when I have to. So I'm still busy, got plenty to do, but I get to do the majority of it right here in and around Emporia, and I'm happy about that.
Man, love to hear that, Hermie. Love to hear that you guys are enjoying life right now, and just miss being around you and Elliot so much. We had a lot of fun in the days. We had your charity basketball game. We'd always play in charity golf tournaments together. But I think the really good thing, Hermie, is you and I were able to be part of broadcasting on Speed Channel, and Elliot was too, when we were just having fun. We were just trying to tell it like it was, and covering the sport with news, but at the same time, though, bringing the entertainment factor out.
Johnny, I hear people say all the time when they talk about the on-track product, they want to say, well, racing is not like what it used to be. And, in some respects, I think the racing now is as good as it's ever been. But I also hear people say all the time, TV is not the same as it was when you guys had that race day crew doing the speed race day pre-race show and then the victory lane post-race show. And I would agree 100% with that. We had a great group of people in front of the camera and behind the scenes that truly respected and loved each other. Many different personalities, no egos really involved, and we just all did our part, whether it was a big part, small part, and we did fun stuff, we did serious stuff, we were very knowledgeable in our certain areas, and we were able to really bring that to life on Speed Channel every weekend. And I, not just because I was a part of it or because you were a part of it, we had a great team, and I think we had a passionate team. And I think there's not even, fast forward 10, 12 years later, whatever you want to say, there's not a team or a group of people that brought TV to life like we did with our speed crew, back in the mid 2000s. We had a lot of fun. It showed in our work, and I think the fans really respected us for that.
All right, Hermie, here's one of my favorite moments, right? So you were serious the whole show about covering the race and getting the technical side out to fans. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of the show, one day, Hermie starts walking across Victory Lane, and there's a ladder there. And you climbed up the ladder, and when you got to the top of the ladder, you interviewed Yao Ming, the 7'7" NBA.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
That was awesome.
I had so much fun, man. I mean, I went down about a month ago or so to the last Race Hub show, and I saw so many people that I hadn't seen in a long time, including our buddy Scotty Keith. So I did a lot of that stuff with Scott Keith. Yeah, Toby Keith, you call him. God bless Toby Keith, too. But, we talked about Yao Ming. I remember one time on the pre-race show, I interviewed Evander Holyfield, and I gave him the old Fred G. Sanford, all that. And, I remember Rutledge Wood and I one time went to Texas Stadium, the new stadium at Dallas, Texas, where the Cowboys play. And that's one thing that was so frustrating. I don't want this show to get off on a tangent, but you and I both know when executives from the network that we worked for kind of started moving in, and JR, I'm going to say this so you don't have to. Okay. I think they started sabotaging our show, in some ways to tear it down so they could justify doing some other things they wanted to do. But I had a meeting one day at Phoenix with one of the new quote unquote, TV know-it-alls from Fox. The guy comes in and says, well, Hermie, you don't have a lot of personality. And I'm like, if you see some of the stuff I did with Rutledge and the Yao Ming and Evander Holyfield and all these, I said, sir, with all due respect, I don't think you've ever watched one of our shows, because we had
I don't think so.
I think we had a really diverse group of people. You take, you could be serious and make people laugh. Kyle Petty could be serious and make people laugh. Kenny Wallace obviously could be serious, very knowledgeable, but also could make people laugh. Wendy Venturini, still one of the best broadcasters of any gender that I've ever been around.
Agree.
She could be serious, or we could make people laugh too. Krista Voda. So many decisions that I'll never understand why they did what they did. But we all had jobs to do and did it as a team and had fun doing it. And I just really believe that somebody from LA sent somebody in there to say, we gotta tear this show down before we can go back with what we want to do. In a lot of ways, I think that's what they did. And the fans suffered as much as we did as on-air talent, in my view.
Yeah, and Hermie, I got to just agree with you so much that it was such a blessing to be part of Speed Channel, because those were just the great days for us. And you hit it right on the head when you said no one was really concerned about who got credit for what. And just to prove that me and Hermie Sadler were not divas in any way, I want to remind you of a story, and I don't know if you remember this, Hermie, or not. So, guys, folks, me and Hermie are in what was called the fan zone at Daytona Speed Week's coverage, right? And we get up there and we have these little Madonna, they called them Madonna mics because they came around our faces, right? So we have these little electronic devices on our faces. And Hermie looks at me and he goes, JR, is there a bee on my face? I feel like I'm getting stung on my face. And I go, God, Hermie, me too, me too. And guys, these mics were electrocuting us. They were charged somehow. Do you remember that, Hermie? That we had to go through the whole show getting our faces electrocuted.
I don't remember that, but I did wreck a lot in my driving days.
I swear it happened. I swear it happened.
Yeah. I was telling some stories the other day. One time I do remember, speaking of being at Daytona, you remember we used to go early for testing to cover,
Yes.
January preseason Thunder testing, I think they called it. So some of the stuff was live on Speed. Some of it was on the internet back and forth. And I drove down, as I got later in my career, this is how much things changed for me, Johnny. Back in the early 90s when I was racing in the Busch Grand National Series, getting my racing career started, running for Rookie of the Year, I loved being on the road. So I would leave as soon as I could, and I would stay gone as long as I could before I came home. As I got, later in my career doing TV, I would leave home as late as possible and come home as soon as I could.
Yeah.
So I remember for this one time that we were doing Daytona testing, I was driving from Emporia down to Daytona, so I left late and drove, and I got tired, so I pulled over, went to sleep, did all that. So long story short, I got to the racetrack only about an hour before we were ready to go on the air. And they rotated us as talent during the day that day. And so as an analyst before me was Kyle Petty. And back in those days, Kyle was on TV with whoever else was on there. And back in those days, he used to have his goatee and had it tied up in braids and had little rubber bands around it. And he was on TV. And so Kyle got off, I got on TV, and I had simply the 5 o'clock shadow. I didn't have any beard or nothing weaved together or braided or anything. I just had, I hadn't shaved since the day prior. And I'm on the air, and Steve Craddock, our friend,
Yes.
that was our boss at the time, hits me and talk back, and he says, why haven't you shaved? And you will shave before tomorrow's show, right? And I said, this was during break. I said, Craddock, did you just see Kyle Petty? He had a goatee down to here, and it was tied together and had little braids and stuff. He said, Hermie, his last name is Petty, and your last name is Sadler. Shave before tomorrow.
I don't see much difference.
I said, got it.
What's the difference there, Hermie? Your last name's Sadler. Shoot.
About 230 wins and 7 championships, or whatever else. Yeah.
Right. Hey, listen, Hermie, brother, I miss you. I love you. And, man, just had such a great time with you over the years, and it's great to talk to you. I hope to see you real soon.
I appreciate you having me. It's always good to see you. Next time I'm out in the Music City, I'll look you up and hope to see you real soon.
All right, Hermie Sadler, thanks, brother. Time now for this week's edition of Ward Burton Said It, and we're actually going to say something that Ward Burton said and quote somebody else. In this case, since we just talked to Hermie Sadler, we're going to quote his brother Elliott, because it was at a fan appreciation event at the Atlanta Motor Speedway when somebody from the crowd asked Elliott Sadler a question, but it was more of a statement. They said, hey, Elliott, Ward Burton says you talk funny. And Elliott Sadler said, Ward Burton says I talk funny? That man says the word caterpillar and never moves his lips. So that's a little bit of a skew on this week's edition of Ward Burton Said It. Glad you're joining us, everybody, here on this edition of Lights Out with Johnny Roberts. We'll have another one for you next week. Thanks for coming along for the ride.